Putin sends in reinforcements from Rosgvardia as clashes break out between protesters and police. This is one of the largest demonstrations in Russia since Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine prompted a crackdown on opposition, as demonstrators opposed to an activist's jail term clashed with police outside a courthouse. Protesters gathered in Baimak, a town of 17,000 people located 1,100 miles east of Moscow in the Republic of Bashkortostan, to support Fail Alsanov, who was sentenced to 4 years in prison for inciting ethnic hatred. As reported, Putin's domestic military force, the Rosgvardia, has sent troops there, according to Dan Storyev, an English-language editor of the Russian human rights initiative OVD Info, which had reporters present. The demonstrations demonstrated that the Russian people are prepared to stand up for their rights despite the horrific repression. Storyev spoke to Newsweek about this. Russian police dispersed the thousands-strong gathering with smoke grenades, tear gas, and batons in sub-zero temperatures, -21°C, -5°F, according to the outlet Idel, Realii, which is a branch of Radio Free Europe, which is supported by the United States. The news of arrests also made its way into Telegram. Many in the Republic of the Ural Mountains have taken to the streets in response to Alsanov's sentencing, claiming that he is a victim of the oppression of the indigenous Bashkir people's language and culture. Alsanov, 37, was fined 10,000 ruble, $113, for breaking wartime censorship laws in December 2022 for venting his disapproval of Putin's partial mobilization in Ukraine, which he referred to as a genocide of the Bashkir peoples in a V-Contact post. But Alsanov faced charges after a Bashkir remark he made at a demonstration in April 2023. The term was seen by authorities as a racial slur, although it really means something like simple folk. His involvement in the environmental demonstrations on Kushta Mountain in the Ishimbaysky area of Bashkortostan in 2020, which were protests against limestone extraction, has also brought him fame. Protests forced the rescheduling of Alsanov's sentencing from Monday to Wednesday. However, the subsequent demonstrations were even larger. Authorities reportedly slowed the city's internet connection and barred the drive to the court, according to Rosnews. According to Nexta and Bashkortostan Live's Telegram groups, Rosgvardia teams are en route to the location. Storyev claimed that the Kremlin is currently engaged in a domestic war against any and all forms of dissent in addition to its war in Ukraine. This trend of increasing crackdown includes the prosecution of Alsanov. This oppressive movement is up against a fiercely independent population in Bashkortostan. While it's too early to say whether the protests spell drastic trouble for the Kremlin, the protests do show that Russian society is willing to protest and stand up for their rights despite the horrific repression. Putin, who is running for president again in March, may face opposition from public displays of resentment against the Kremlin notwithstanding the restrictions on liberties imposed since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Family members of Russian troops who were deployed laid flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier on the Kremlin wall last weekend as a protest against the war and conditions for soldiers. According to Russia's foreign ministry, a new interstate treaty between Iran and Russia is nearing completion and is likely to be signed soon by President Vladimir Putin and his Iranian counterpart. At a time when the United States and Israel are worried about the strengthening of political, economic, and military links between Moscow and Tehran, Putin met with Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi for 5 hours in the Kremlin last month, according to Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, who addressed reporters on Wednesday. The new pact would encompass all aspects of the relationship between Moscow and Tehran and strengthen their strategic alliance. What Zakharova meant was that the document was long overdue, not to mention that it was timely. Since the signing of the current treaty, the international context has changed and relations between the two countries are experiencing an unprecedented upswing. During one of the forthcoming meetings between the two heads of state, Zakharova said, the new treaty is anticipated to be inked. An precise date for the meeting between the two leaders has not been decided yet, according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, quoted by the TASS state news agency. As of November, the Kremlin had stated that, including in the field of military technical cooperation, contacts were strengthening between Russia and Iran. However, they chose not to address the White House's assertion that Iran might be contemplating supplying Russia with ballistic missiles Iranian officials have stated that their country's military cooperation with Russia is growing. Russian military hardware, including Su-35 fighter jets, Mi-28 attack helicopters, and Yak-130 pilot training aircraft, was reportedly finalized in November by Iran.